Many of us just watched the documentary recently. I watched it only recently. Somebody had recommended it to me on my Instagram several times. So like, you should watch this, you should watch this. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I had been a vegetarian for 12 years. I can tell you that the last couple of years I've been a little bit lax about it. And since I watched the documentary, well, first I was shocked. I was like, I had no idea this was going to be about what it was about. But it was about other things as well. Like, and that's one thing I want to talk about first, I think, is the fact that Jesus is called Jesus of Nazareth and that Nazareth didn't actually exist. And it was kind of made up. And what they say was on the cross was not Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus the Nazarene. So let's talk about that first, you guys. Whoever would like to share that idea or that where did that come from? I wanted to hear more about that in the documentary too. That's why I wanted to start. Like Nazareth wasn't a real place.
Right. Cam, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, for sure. So this is actually like one of the more controversial points apparently because Netflix we signed with Netflix when we were making this film as a Netflix original, just like one of the previous films from my co-director. But when we produced our first edit and handed it over to Netflix, this was like right around the beginning of 2020. The COVID thing was going off. Everything was just kind of crazy. And in the midst of all that, we handed over our edit. And this was one of the major notes that Netflix had that they wanted to actually remove from the film was this notion of Jesus the Nazarene versus Jesus of Nazareth. And it's really kind of the breaking point that when we wrestled back and forth with Netflix about this issue, neither of us would budge. They really wanted it out of the film. We really wanted to keep it in the film. And we just held our ground and eventually bought our rights back. And that's why we have it on our own website right now. And, we're doing this whole independent launch. And given you're on school and all that, I'm sure like you said, you can relate. But the general thesis is that Nazareth as a town, where we know it to be today, like where you could go fly to the Holy Land and visit, that town name and that location doesn't exist in any historical record until 200 years after Jesus' death in church records. And it's 400 years in secular record, which is really kind of a little bit more of a accurate depiction typically in biblical scholarship. Like you want to go with the secular attestation over the theological one, just because you can typically trust it to be, more accurate. It's not to say that the theological records aren't important, but the secular record usually outwins. So it's somewhere between 200, 400 years that we get that name for that town. Now, there is archaeological record, obviously, of a town from as early or maybe even before the first century in the location where Nazareth is today. But it's not like that pottery that they're finding has the name Nazareth on it. It's just pottery there of a village that did exist there. So this raises a lot of questions. And so when we were on our journey trying to really figure out a lot about the historical Jesus to really answer this question, what would Jesus do about animal killing and specifically in his time, animal sacrifice? We had to say, we had to figure out, where is he really from? And so when we looked into the scholarship, this was the point that really took things in a whole different direction where we realized, wow, there's been this whole misnomer around the phrase Jesus of Nazareth. It's probably the most common name for Jesus outside Jesus Christ. Everyone knows him as Jesus of Nazareth. There was a famous film in the 70s that blew up, Jesus of Nazareth. But in the Greek, Jesus Nazarios or Jesus Nazarenos is really what's there. And both of those titles, you can even confirm this on something as basic as Wikipedia, although I recommend going to the deeper sources, but it sources it there for you. In the first paragraph, if you Google Nazarene title and pull up the Wikipedia, in the first paragraph, it'll show you from the Biblical Encyclopedia, etc., that shows that the vowel usage in the Greek for Nazarios and Nazarenos complicates any derivation from the town of Nazareth. So it doesn't linguistically even work. Those names don't point to a town. What it really points to is a sectarian designation. And so we have that sectarian designation even in, the New Testament and the book of Acts. The Apostle Paul actually gets accused of being a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And so it tells you there in Acts that it was a sectarian title. But to your point in the film, in John's gospel, we have this depiction of this sign above Jesus' name, as if it's like the crime he is being punished for. King of the Jews, Jesus the Nazarene, or Nazarios. So then that raises a lot of questions. Okay, if it's not from Nazareth or of Nazareth, then what does it actually mean? And it turns out, as we, show very briefly in the film, I wish we could have gone a lot deeper, but we only have 90 minutes in a film to cover all these topics. So we just barely talked about it, but I've discussed it at length in other podcasts, that this sectarian title actually is before even Jesus, that there are records, not only, again, from theological, we have Epiphanius of Salamis, who's about the 4th century, writing about the heresy of the Nazarenes, because they're a heresy to the Orthodox Church. And he says that they existed before Christ. And then also we have secular record, like I said, biblical scholarship takes that even more seriously. The sectarian record of a kingdom of the Nazarenes from Pliny the Elder goes all the way back to like 30 to maybe even 50 BC. So this is a really ancient lineage that we can get into if we want to get into the weeds about like how it's even in the Old Testament and this and that. But bottom line, Jesus didn't just come from Nazareth and get this title. And then the first Christians 100% were called Nazarenes before they were called Christians. But we just get this misnomer drilled into our heads that it just means, oh, they follow the guy from Nazareth. That's what Nazarenes means, when really it's a specific religious sectarian title, and it separates those who follow the Nazarene way from the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the temple cult of the time. So that's the basic premise, I guess.
I love it. And the Nazarenes were rebels, right? They were not for the establishment, in other words.
100%. And in fact, it's funny you mentioned that, because Epiphanius, the church father in the 4th century I mentioned, he's probably one of our best sources on the Nazarenes, but ironically, he's a hostile witness, meaning he was heavily against them. So he's writing all of these, reasons why, as a, bishop in the 4th and 5th century, you should reject anyone who says they're a Nazarene. But he notes in his introduction to his book, the Panarion, which is against all the heresies, that he heard that the term Nazarene means rebel. That's literally what he says. He says he heard it means. Now, really what it more likely points to, I mean, it kind of does match this in a way, but what it really points to is, ancient Hebrew and Aramaic didn't use vowels, so it's really NSR or NZR. And that root means either the keepers or the watchers or the protectors, like the keepers of the way, the ones who preserve the original intention, if you will. And it has a double meaning, which also means the branch, like like in botany, when you have a shoot of a plant that you can then take off and replant it and it grows as a whole new tree. That's a netzer. That's what that word means, is this whole, in a way, it is a keeping of the original way, but replanting a new whole tree. So it's like this double poetic meaning for this branch or this offshoot of the original tree of the Hebrew faith, but then reroots as like a restoration of what it was originally meant to be.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what it originally meant to be, I think about how the Hebrew religion is nothing like Judaism as it is today. And I haven't done a ton of research on that, but it seems pretty obvious, like that Jesus was a Jew, but he wasn't like of Judaism at all. Like modern Judaism does not comport with the way of Jesus, like in thinking about the whole nonviolence thing and looking at what's going on in Israel right now, like these are not people living the way at all. Of course, the way they feel about Jesus is
Yeah.
controversial in itself, but it's so crazy how everything's been twisted, not only in Christianity but in Judaism as well. And people ask me a lot of times, why don't I speak about Christian or anything other than Christianity? I'm like, I didn't grow up in Judaism, I didn't grow up in Islam, I grew up in Christianity, and it's like I'm in the niche right now, and that just makes sense to me. So in terms of what the Nazarenes believed, what the way was, in addition to, would you say that nonviolence and not killing, including animals, was that central to it?
Absolutely. So the best witness that we have to this, again, is Epiphanius. And the reason why it's really solid too is because when you have a hostile witness, a lot of times you can trust that as well because they want to preserve what they believe. They will add some fluff to it to try to make them, say like, oh, they believe Jesus was a 96-foot, angel, like crazy stuff like that for some of the sects. But then when it says something kind of plain like this, we can pretty well trust that he's getting an accurate read on what these people actually believe. So he says that this Nazarene sect that existed before Christ, even, that they were just like the Hebrews in every order, except for one major difference. And the one major difference was they would not offer animal sacrifices and they would not consume the flesh of animals because they believed it was unlawful to do this. And then it goes on to say that they did believe in Moses and all these patriarchs and the stories of the Hebrew faith, but they believed that Moses had received a different legislation, a different Torah, a different law, not the one being used and being preached in the synagogues, but some other. And the differentiation was it finally ends the paragraph of that whole description that they believed that the sacrifices were forged, that they were forgeries, that they had forged this whole concept into the Torah and on top of Moses's original, kind of oration that he gave from the Lord. And that was the big thing. They were anti-temple cult sacrificial blood ritual system, full stop. And to your point too about their kind of clash with what we know today as modern Judaism, if you will. Really, back then it was just temple cult Judaism. And in the first century, not only, like I said, we have Orthodox priests and historians and heresiologists like Epiphanius who are condemning them as heretics, but the Orthodox Jewish religion of the time was too. So in the first century, the earliest prayer that we have or example of the Jewish faith calling anyone a heresy is the curse against the Nazarenes. It's called the Birkat Hamanim. You can look that up. It's on Wikipedia too. Birkat Hamanim. That's Birkat Hamanim. And it's the curse of the sectarians, the curse against the heretics. And when you read it, it literally says, they would pray in a certain direction and they would pray this curse against the Nazarenes. May their name be blotted out of the book of life and this and that. So this group was hated by both, their contemporaries in the Jewish religion, which was really just the Hebrew religion that became the Jewish religion over time. And they were also eventually hated by the Orthodox, Christian church, the Roman Catholicism version. So yeah, people didn't like them very much.
And if I'm correct, from my understanding and having watched the film, the way that animal sacrifice was portrayed in the New Testament has basically been erased. Like the whole Jesus flipped tables is always depicted as he walks into a little mini church and flips a table or two of money changers. And it has nothing to do with like the thousands of animals that were in there and the marketplace, the enterprise, the industry that animal sacrifice was, and that the priests were telling people that they needed to sacrifice animals because God needed blood, which I talk a lot about in my videos. Like, God never needed blood. Like, it's insane that people think that God needs blood for any reason. And he's God, like, he has all the blood he wants if he wants it. You know what I mean? Just make a pool of it if you really like it that much. But this idea of God needing blood was perpetuated by the priests to sell the animals to them. And then the people would bring the animals that they had purchased from the priest back to the priests to sacrifice them. And then the priest would then sell the animals back to meat, therefore making money off of them twice. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the temple was essentially the earliest rendition that became what we now have as the modern day slaughterhouse. Before temples, and this isn't even just the Hebrew faith, by the way, you find this all across the board in every religion, that at some point a temple cult enters and their priesthood is formed. It's the same in Hinduism. I mean, we think of Hinduism as this they revere cows and this and that. But as you saw in the film, we found that to be a complete hypocrisy as well in the way that everything is panned out. But like even in that tradition, all the way back to ancient pre-Abrahamic times and the Vedas and everything, the Brahmins, who were the holy men, the priests of the Hindu faith, they got involved with animal sacrifice and everything. And then eventually the Buddha comes along and he's one of the, people that stands against that. But it's everywhere. And what happens is you have ancient agricultural, like somewhere between gatherer and agriculture, where you have these tribes that do subsist on more plant-based foods, whether they're gathering it because there's an abundance already in the wild, or they start to cultivate it to some extent. And then you have the herding cultures. And so you have a clash just between herding culture. It's the Cain and Abel story, right? And so you have this clash between these two different ways that develops over time. And most ancient cultures, like they just didn't eat a lot of meat. We've been taught that like this idea of these caveman Neanderthals that are just killing animals all the time and eating them is not the case. Like science has shown that uh, most ancient humans actually lived on a pretty consistent plant-based diet because it's just energy expenditure to hunt down an animal is just so great that most just it's not feasible for the tribe. So eventually, when they do settle long enough through maybe some agriculture and whatnot, there comes a point in time where they're like, oh, the gluttony comes in and they want to start raising and domesticating animals. And then eventually that leads to the earliest kind of industrial system of killing animals, which is the sacrificial system. Because in ancient times, it was taboo to kill animals, even maybe more so than it is now, because everyone had to see it when it happened and no one really liked it, probably. So they developed a system of like holiness around it. They try to make it into this spiritual thing, and then eventually it becomes a commodification thing, to your point, where now you've got priests that are meant to be the ones that do it the holy way, but then they're making some money off of it because they're able to sell the excess to the market and the shambles, and they're able to get the choice meats, and then you get taxation involved and all of these other, I mean, it really is at the roots of so many of the systems today that we are also frustrated with, from taxation to the artificial person, and everything that creates the matrix around us, if you will, is rooted in this temple cult system. It all originated there. And then I was going to say too, around the point about Jesus's you know, uh, moment when he goes into the temple, which is what we talk about in the film. It's one of the big climaxes for our film. To your point, yeah, that's exactly right. I was always taught in church that he goes in and he turns over the tables and he's mad about the money and the merchandise. And it's almost like a mega church who's got a coffee bar, and Jesus is like, nah, like we ain't having coffee in here. But the truth is it's really animals. The only merchandise being sold in the temple were animals. And we're not talking like a little pin off to the side in the corner where there's like a few. We're talking hundreds of thousands, to even the Talmud says millions, probably an overblown number, but per week are the other numbers. So like Passover week, yeah, there's so much blood from all the animals being slaughtered that it says that the priests are wading up to their shins in blood. So you've got this gory, I mean, imagine the stink, the flies, the smoke, the whole thing. And so Jesus rolled up in there and he's like, what is happening? And so we've, again, like the Nazareth situation, Jesus of Nazareth, there's been a grand mistranslation over the millennia that helped cover this up, where Jesus calls the temple a den of thieves, because thievery fits the story better of the money changing and just some merchandise or whatever. But that's not what he really said, as you can see in the film. What he said was much more damning and directed at the animal slaughter. And so, yeah, we have this whole tradition of this Nazarene movement that was against temple animal sacrifice, and then Jesus himself and what he's saying that's directed at that system, but it's been glossed. It's been glossed over. So, anyways, I'm talking a bunch. I want Chris to chime in too on any thoughts he has.
Well, I was as you're talking, Cam, if you recall, we're in a group chat, myself, Cam, and a handful of others, and I experimented just the other day with this AI rendering of what it must have been like for Jesus in the temple, just for exactly what Cam was just talking about. And as you're talking, I'm like, I would love to just show this visual while you're talking because I didn't want to. You were doing such a great job, but if anybody cares, I can share it. It's like a 2 second thing, but it's simply my little prompting of like, I don't think people really understand what it's like to process this many animals ritualistically, non-ritualistically. Like even if you're just talking procedurally and you take the whole ritual out of it, it's just a lot according to the official Torah rules, according to the Talmudic record. Even though Cam made a great point that it's most likely overblown, but if it's okay with you, it's a 40-second thing. It's not like this. I had not planned to show this, but as Cam is talking about this, I'm going, you know what? This they should see this because this is like the
You want to
background.
share your screen, Chris?
Sure, I can just share this one. Share. Okay. So y'all can see this. Can y'all see what's on the screen?
Yeah.
So this again, this isn't even up to their ankles. This what I typed in was give me like the inner core of this temple system where you have all this processing and slaughtering of the actual product that everybody's there for, and then you have this figure kind of with the whole Jesus sash going on but with a different take on it, uh
Yeah.
going up to cleanse this temple. It was like kind of an inside joke based on this AI based song that somebody else had shared in the thing. But again, that's it. That's the whole 40-second thing. But just imagine what Cam is talking about. And this is downstairs while everybody's upstairs altruistically hoping that the priest accepts their perfect lamb so that because they can't really afford to buy a perfect lamb because they use all their money to get down to the temple in the first place. And then the priest is like, you see that ankle? I don't know. God ain't gonna really like them. He's a toe man. You see this one over here. This one's got perfect toe. You see, they're selling people. What schmoozing, no different than a mega church pastor. But just this idea that this is really the downstairs of what everybody's considering this holy temple that Jesus had a little problem with the exchange rates on. You see what I'm saying? Somebody at the Forex or the Western Union wasn't being a bit fair with the calculator that day. And so Jesus was like, no, no, no. Let this go on. You see what I'm saying? So when you really visualize what it means to actually process 1,600, my math landed me at about 1,600 per day. Where's my stop here? 1,600 per day just to keep up with the basic like the once per year sorry for my sins sacrifice. Not the hey I had a new baby sacrifice, not the oh I did something else wrong sacrifice. Just the basics. It was 1,600 a day. This thing is talking millions per week, right? I don't think it's that much, but somewhere between 1,600 and a million is the real number. And in order for that to happen, I mean, I don't even know that modern day slaughterhouses process that many full blown bovine, you know what I mean? So I don't like, I could pontificate, but the point was, I just wanted to share, to expand on what Cam was saying, that we have been given this nicely buttoned up little story regarding the temple system, where Jesus came from. My biggest urge with people and appeal is what exactly what you do, Kate. You ask them to think for a second. And then you're not coming at them with like you better or you should or you mustn't. And overall your prognosis is positive. Like once you get out of the religious programming, the world opens up. But I found and why I'm so excited to talk with you here today is that I commented on something of yours maybe from 6 months ago, and to this day, I open my phone and in my notifications are people engaging with that same one post. Now, several others, but that same first one. I'm like, I mean, yes, I agree with what I said, but like, come on, let's talk about something else.
It's
But
crazy what catches on,
yeah,
huh?
no, it is. It really is. And it was related to the Paul thing, but what it has underscored is that Christians, and I'm using Christians as a not pejorative at all. I'm 41. I was literally a Christian up until 31, 32, maybe 34, 35, before the um feeling like the emotion associated with the word was loosened enough for me to realize, I don't actually do the things that the Christians do. I observe these days and not these days. I participate in these holidays and not these holidays. These are Christian holidays. I just don't do those. So it became like, okay, I can actually call a spade now. But that took, a while. And so I have developed empathy for people who just can't do that right away or who just have so much endearing feelings regarding the terms and titles. But what really I'm trying to say at the end of the day is we are given a framework of what should make sense within a model, and it makes sense within the model if you accept and believe in the model. But as soon as you find that the model has some plot holes, you step out and you're like, okay, if I'm covered in blood in any context, that's really bad. Why is it good in this one context? Like blood has always stained everything you put on it. Water cleans, but blood never cleans anything. Like why does it make sense in this one context? You see what I'm saying? And then as I kept going backwards, what I realized, oh, Christians are kind of given they're made to choose after a false presumption is presented to them that they already agree with, that they don't know that they agree with. Even as like an agnostic walking into a church or a revival or something, you are what I call it is the Christian pre-lie. That is the idea that something or someone has to die in order for you to be at reconciliation with yourself, with God, with life, or with whatever. That in order for a wrong to be righted, another unfortunate thing has to happen. And we're given an that's attached to an emotion of endearment. Thank you, God, for doing this for me. Thank you, Paul, for being willing to change your mind, I guess. You know what I'm saying? It's like that's the hero's story. It's like fused. It's the same tactic that they're using with Venom, the movie series Venom, or Bane from Batman, like any of the supervillains movies or the Joker franchise, where you're seeing the imperfections and finding endearment with the villain of the story, and they're attaching a positive emotion with a negative person and behavior. But subtly, not necessarily acutely or overtly. I think this is what's happened. And so what happens to like bring it back to the point of like the Jesus of Nazareth, that has become such a it's like the logo, right? Jesus of Nazareth. Never mind, he's called the Son of Man like 87 times in the New Testament and the Son of God like 8 times. He is of Nazareth. Nazareth. As soon as I get a plane ticket, I can go over to the Holy Land. I'm gonna step foot in Nazareth. And right where these geographical lines are drawn, even though the country didn't exist 100 years ago, this is where Jesus. You see what I'm saying? It's this whole like you're detached from it, and so I've had to kind of draw a little empathy for people who just don't quite get the big okey doke of the whole shebang, just the whole scope as it's been crunched down into what we've been handed. So the reason the answer to your Cam did a great job of answering your question, like was it significant? What was the blood and temple ritual? The end of the day is money and currency moves people's values and their behavior. And they simply had determined and discovered that acting like a vicar of God is more lucrative than acting like a boss. And so they've been doing that since like Babylon, you know.
And somehow I think the crux of it too is like people have been conditioned to not follow Jesus and really move in the way that he moved, speak in the way he spoke, lead the way that he led, but to worship him. And that's something that he never wanted. I don't think any of the Nazarenes in the group, the rebel mystics, whatever they were all like bowing down and worshiping Jesus. He never wanted that. He said worship only God, but then he got conflated with God. Like Jesus was God. He was perfect. And he was fully man and fully human, yet somehow he must have been celibate because he never got married and he never had sex, but he was fully human, which is like, what? Like none of that,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make sense. It only makes sense if you don't think about it, is what they say, right?
You're right. You're right. It only makes sense when you don't think about it because soon as you say, like, Eddie lives inside me, Earl, I'm covered by the blood of Earl. Sounds weird.
It
Sheila's
sounds very weird.
blood is on me and my children. It sounds very weird. So it's all about nomenclature. Like I love like a lot of theology and theological conversations are totally leapfrogged by etymology and nomenclature conversations. And they're doing a lot of back and forth and on these things that are really just like, oh, it's probably the Northern Essenes or the branch, or then it's like a play on words. So many different anachronisms and puns get literalized through transliteration. And here we are like, now where are these Nicolaitans? And this historian who's Aramaic is like, Nicolaitans is like a nickname. It's like the hungry hippos, or the god, the eat 'em ups, the hungry eat whateverers. So when they're saying, when Jesus is condemning the practices of the Nicolaitans, sure, there might have been a Nicholas later, that he was not even referring to, that happens to fit the puzzle piece. But at the same time, if he's speaking Aramaic and there is an Aramaic idiomatic way of essentially talking about his vegetarian admonitions, while at the same time history is overriding them. You see how, whether through sure, the Nicolaitans as some aloof scribe, or whether it's some scribal overlord saying, no, 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 capitalize that in, put it together, they're gonna think it's a Nicolait. You see what I'm saying? Where they're changing the record by like playing off the ignorance of the reader, or like totally not the reader until 1440 when the printing press was created. But you get what I mean. So we can continue with the questions. Again, we can keep pontificating, but I love that Cam brought forth the commercial aspect of what the temple was, because as we know, the church, the bank, the state, commerce is basically like this. And it's been like this, as far as I can tell, since before Jesus was on the scene. I mean, obviously since David and, back in the day, but it for sure before Jesus. So, yeah, they have
Let's
come.
talk about, I want to talk more about the spiritual aspects of like what it does to your frequency when we're consuming animals that have been treated in horrific ways. Because that was really poignant to me in the documentary when because you guys were talking to uh, other religions. Like it wasn't just like Christian religions. You guys were in the jungle talking to a shaman about like, is there any spiritual way to kill an animal? And then I forgot who it was who was saying it, but about what actually happens to your frequency, what happens to your vibration, how it affects your spirit and your body when this frequency enters it, essentially. It's a lot of fear, it's death, it's disease that of these like factory farmed animals, especially, and grass feds. Like I loved the stuff on Joel Salatin, the contradictions that you guys caught him in. That was wild. I was not expecting that. That was insane. So that's like a whole nother barnyard, so to speak, with the grass fed and free range and whatever. It's all about that semantics. It's a language use and whatnot, and natural and cage free and all the things. But I'm curious what you guys think about the spiritual. Let's talk more about the spiritual stuff. Let's expand on that a little bit.
All right, Cam, I want you to really answer this question. I'm just going to tee you up by saying that the framework for how the body is informed, so I've come to learn, is that the spiritual layer governs the energetic layer, and the energetic layer governs the chemical enzyme substrata, bosonic, we'll call it, layer, which then governs the body's physical layer. So when you're dealing with sorcery, it's like hacking that. It's going straight to the chemical layer using energies outside of the normal flow. So as you're answering this question, just keep in mind that protein and all these different conversations that you hear in the vegetarian versus meat eater debate, spiritually speaking, sorry, most of those talking points are completely ignoring the energetic and spiritual aspects of what's going on. So you mentioned suffering and disease and things like that that the animals are going through. And my biggest takeaway so far has been the nervous energy that still is resonant within that flesh that's now a part of your field. And your field informs everything about your body downwind. So you're almost like ingesting protein and also like instructions for destabilizing that protein and ruining your body at an energetic level subtly, right? But like cumulatively is where the issue is. But Cam, you go for it.
Yeah, I'm glad we're going to this point because there is so much we could talk about with the physical, with like where you get your protein and these kinds of conversations. And there's an answer for all of that. But it really does go deeper. And it's unfortunate that in these conversations, when it comes to what we consume in regards to animals and animal products, that we get stuck in this protein land And we forget about this aspect because, from what I can tell with your platform here and what you put out in the world, Caitlin, there's this idea that's circling in the truth or community, underneath not everyone wants to talk about it, but it's this whole adrenochrome thing, right? That they talk about with the elites, and it has all these different rabbit holes that you can go down on this topic. But everybody just thinks it's just a concept from human blood. But animals have adrenaline too. And all
Yeah.
adrenochrome is it's oxidized adrenaline in the blood. That's literally what it is. You can look it up on, again, Wikipedia says adrenochrome is on Wikipedia, and it's oxidized. It's when blood with adrenaline in it hits oxygen. And the only way to do that is to cut a hole in something and get it out into the oxygen. So that's what's happening in these scenarios with these not only ancient rituals, but modern rituals that are still happening in slaughterhouses, et cetera. And so we have this whole stir amongst the truther communities about what could be happening behind closed doors with all of these rituals, and forgetting that it's happening every day in the billions to animals, and we're all consuming it and not really thinking about the fact that it's the same thing. In the scripture, it says that the blood has life, right? In the blood is the life, the ruach. And it's very clear in scripture that humans and animals share the same ruach. From Genesis to Solomon, the wisest man supposedly who ever lived, he says that animals and humans share the same ruach, which is the life in the blood. So when you're consuming animals who have been put through all of this suffering, and just to be clear, whether it's months and months and months of suffering in confinement in a cage in a factory farm, or it's that split second, not even seconds, split minute experience from a grass-fed, free-range, humanely fed, whatever the labels are, the same adrenaline hits their bloodstream no matter how much they've suffered before that moment when they actually get killed, because they realize what's happening. And there's studies that have shown this. In fact, there's an argument that even for the more grass-fed, humanely raised, et cetera, that there maybe is even more of an adrenaline uptick at death, because they are genuinely happy animals, and they've become trusting of the people around them, and all of a sudden they're betrayed in the last moment. And it's kind of like the same thing as like why all the ancient rituals always wanted a virgin or a child or whatever, because they're the most innocent and they just trust everyone. And then at the last moment when they get, tortured in this horrific way, it spikes the adrenaline even more. If you're suffering your whole life, your adrenaline reserves are going to be like depleted over time. So anyways, just throwing that out there. But to your point, yeah, when we're consuming this, I actually did a whole podcast recently on one of my friends' podcasts, Dr. Narco Longo. It's Old World Florida. He has a podcast about like ancient Florida and all of these really cool concepts. But
That's where I live. We're in Florida right now.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So my buddy Connor and we did a 5-hour live stream the other day that actually is crazy. A lot of people are watching, and I didn't think they were because it was so long. But it's doing well on his channel, and we covered blood ritual sacrifice and the fast food industry and the connection through secret societies, and the way that these ancient secret societal ties actually built the fast food industry to push more of this type of oxidized, adrenalized flesh onto the population and the poor people specifically, right? The common people, because fast food is more accessible, and why. And there's so many implications for that in our modern society of why that happened. But going back to the other conversation we had earlier about blood, and like, why would God need blood? And like, what is this all about? There's this story in the Cain and Abel story where when Abel is killed, the first human murder, supposedly, right? That when the blood hits the ground, God tastes it, is the way that the scripture says it. And it's almost this idea of like that adrenalized blood from a murder, from an unjust taking of a life, has this simmering, taste, or like the metaphysical space feels it. And so if you're on the light side, that's a sad thing. But if you're negatively polarized, you can actually gain energy from that. And we have that all throughout the scripture and the traditions, like the Enochian literature. A lot of people are on to the Book of Enoch and how it was in the original canon, but then it was removed and it's still in the Enoch, the Ethiopian canon. But it explicitly says that the fallen angels, the Nephilim, all these like heavily polarized demons, if you will, that they were the ones who actually started killing and consuming animals on Earth. There's a specifically it's book or chapter 7, verse 14. And here's another example of one of these cover-ups around this topic all through the scripture. If you're someone who decides, hey, I really want, maybe you're hearing what I'm saying and you're skeptical, I always say, don't take my word for it. Just go look, just go down the rabbit hole of research, because I like capital T truth is capital T truth. It's going to withstand. And what I found is all over every time there's a cover up within scripture, it's like 90% of the time it's trying to cover up this topic. So an example is even in the Book of Enoch. We have from a more recent translation that uses the Greek version of the Book of Enoch, which was found, I believe, in the Nag Hammadi text. The chapter 7, verse 14 says that the Nephilim, which are the offspring of fallen angels, of demons, essentially, on earth, they're like a hybrid demon-human being. In the text, it says that they began to eat one another's flesh and drink their blood. So scholars have read that and said, oh, it sounds, it's saying that the Nephilim, these giant hybrids, are eating each other. They're cannibals. All right. But if you look at the original Ethiopic Gaiz translation, which is building on the Aramaic tradition, so again, Google it. Google Book of Enoch, Aramaic or Ethiopian translation, and it corrects it. It says that the fallen ones ate the flesh and blood of animals, reptiles, etc., and consumed the animal's blood one after the other, and created all this corruption and sin. So it specifies that it's the animals, not just some cannibalism thing, right? But you see that, that's what I'm saying. Every tradition gets corrupted with like, hey, let's gloss over that a little bit. We don't want anyone to know, it's like that. What's the reason behind that? So we could talk for ages about all the mistranslations, but that's another one. So there's this idea that this blood drinking, flesh consumption whole thing is something that the dark force uses for power. All over the scripture in the Nag Hammadi text, like the Gospel of Philip, it says that the animal sacrifice isn't for the high God, the most high God. It's for lowercase g gods to give them power. And what is that power? The power is really
life force energy.
Life force energy. It charges people up for war. Like a lot of times, animal sacrificial ritual is tied to combat. So you'll see that all the time in the scripture, like the killing of the Amalekites and this and that, or even in Greek lore and whatnot, even the Vedas.
Even in the U.S. Marine Corps to this day.
Exactly. So when you, and what Chris is alluding to is, I'm sure people have heard about MK Ultra, the project where mind control experiments were done with the CIA and all the three-letter agencies trying to find ways to manipulate people for various reasons. One of them was to create super soldiers. So there's all kinds of documentation about how they were trying to hack people's psyche to remove the empathy complex and make them better killers, essentially. And they use this for assassins, etc. And there's these books that these survivors from the programs have written where they say one of the first things that they do is they have them ritually kill an animal. Because it breaks something in the psyche. And in the documents, that process is called the generation of the alter. So alter as in alternate personality, because it splits the psyche, but also what is in the middle of the temple where they sacrifice the animals? The altar. They do it on the altar. So there's this idea that it splits the psyche. It allows people to have a more controllable subset of their psychological framework, where then those who have pushed them into that ritual now have a certain kind of power over them. And so you would see that in ancient cultures where if they were about to have to go battle and kill some other tribe, human instinct isn't to kill another person. Like we don't, I mean, unless you're already psychologically broken, but most humans don't want to, it's not in our instinct to kill each other, but they would have everybody slay and sacrifice all these animals to desensitize that empathetic complex and then be able to do the battle, or it's tied to it after they triumph over this tribe, and after they kill all their animals and cook them up and eat them and everything, and it's this celebration. And the idea is that the gods, lowercase g gods, feed on that and just bring more and more power into the city, or the power structure there from this sacrifice. So all that circling back to your point about what it does to us spiritually, I think from a scriptural level, from a scientific level, whatever way you want to look at it, there's evidence that we get compromised when we consume this stuff. And it lowers our capacity to empathize. It lowers our capacity to really think clearly. Because, like I said, there's this altered state. And we know, like we talk about this in the film, the fact that we can love our dog, a companion animal, right? And they're to be loved. But then we take a pig who is actually smarter than a dog, actually, and put them on our plate and eat them, is like the most fundamental root discrimination that you can have. And it's something that a child would not inherently have. Like if you put a dog and a pig in front of a child, like in a knife and an apple, they're just going to try to feed the apple to the pig and eat they're not going to, there's no like, oh, I eat that one, I love that one, right? So that fundamental disconnect is something that really people always talk about, the splitting of the right and left hemisphere of our brain and how we only think with one side and all of this. So much of all this is rooted in this sacrificial blood ritual system. Like it's age old disconnection from ourselves, from who we really are, from our place amongst the other creatures on this planet. And I can get into a lot of philosophy about that. But bottom line, to your point, yeah, I think the adrenaline caught in the animal, the cognitive dissonance that's created, all of it has vast implications that we're only just really starting to understand from a scientific level, but also from a scriptural level because it's been covered up for so long.
I watched Earthlings right before I officially became a vegetarian in 2000, and I don't really ascribe to labels. Now I consider myself plant-based omnivore, but I haven't eaten meat in like a month since I watched Christspiracy. But I remember watching Earthlings, and I made the connection between it was chicken because I ate a lot of chicken at that time, and I was like, it's the same word, like the word for animal chicken and the word for food chicken is the same. And I was like, those things became fused, and I realized that the chicken on my plate was the same as the chicken animal, and that had never happened before. And I think you're right when you said that, if you put a dog and a pig in front of a boy and asked him which one he would rather eat, he wouldn't want to eat any of them. But we don't see that process. We're so disconnected from the process of how our meat becomes our food, like our animals become meat, especially.
Yeah.
And the euphemisms that are used, like they use
Oh man.
poultry and they use pork instead of pig, they use beef instead of cow. It's all euphemistic language
Yeah.
to further disconnect our psyche from what it is that we're actually eating. And I was smoking marijuana at the time, but one time I walked into a barbecue place with some people and I could only order the sides because it was like I was in a dystopian movie for a second. It was a totally different perception that I had. It was like I'm in a slaughterhouse and they're like marketing me this flesh. It's literally flesh, and like everybody's got it on their plate and they're just eating flesh, and it was so weird at the time. And I mean it feels different now because I'm not smoking marijuana now, but at the time it was like I'm in a dystopia. Like there's so much about our society that is dystopian that it's just so normalized that we don't notice it. um but yeah, I think just making that connection between it being food and you're actually cooking a piece of flesh, and we are all made of the same thing. Like spiritually, we are all one. We're all connected. Their blood is no different than our blood, and their flesh is no different than our flesh. And if you look at what they eat, and talking about like the physical, where do you get your protein, and the fact that protein and meat have become synonyms when they're not is bizarre to me as well. Like, the animals don't eat meat. I mean, I've heard that some chickens eat ground up chickens, like in some of the dirty factory farms, like they are cannibalistic because they put ground up chicken in their feed and whatever. But
Yeah.
gorillas are vegetarians. I love that meme of like some chunky McDonald's eating American person asking a gorilla, "Where do you get your protein?" He's like shoving leaves into his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, the strongest, oldest, uh, yeah, strongest, longest living, and biggest pound for pound animals. All three of those categories are all led by vegetarian animals, animals that just eat plants, which is ironic. But you said so much in that bit there that I felt so many things like, oh, I want to say something about that. See, so I'm going to try to remember all of it. But first thing is I do want to lead with the caveat now that we're this deep into the conversation. People may be thinking, that I'm some person who's just been vegetarian my whole life. I haven't, I'm vegan for 15 years now, but before that, when I was growing up, I was raised in the South in the Bible Belt. I was a hunter. As you saw in the film, I was a part of a Christian youth hunting club. I was a lifelong fisherman, sport fisherman. I used to go 40 miles offshore in the Gulf to catch grouper and snapper and the whole thing. And then my stepdad owned a barbecue restaurant. So I was in that all the time and just ate a ton of meat. And so the only way that I really entered this whole paradigm was because my family decided to do a Daniel fast, which we briefly touch on in the film. But just so people are aware of what that is, I'm sure you've heard like Catholics have Lent, this period where they step back from luxuries or certain foods or whatever to try to draw closer to God. Well, growing up a Southern Baptist and being a Protestant, we don't really have anything like that. Everybody's just eating everything they can all the time. There's no like fasting paradigm almost at all in the Protestant faith. But my family got turned onto it because there was this kind of fad diet, if you will, that got popularized in the Christian sphere called the Daniel fast. And basically, it's built on the biblical story of the prophet Daniel, who is a Hebrew that's enslaved to Babylon. So it's at a moment where the Hebrews have been conquered and they've been taken back to Babylon. And he and his brothers are basically intellectual slaves. So they're not like day laborer slaves. They're actually really smart. So the Babylonians, what they would do is they would say, hey, well, the really smart, adept ones, let's actually feed them real good and put them in real good housing and just force them to be intellectual slaves so they can continue all their studies and then we'll just glean what they find for our kingdom instead, right? So they really took care of them. So in part of that, you'll see in the book of Daniel in the opening chapter that Daniel is enslaved and they try to give him all the choice foods from the king's table to really just treat them well, he and his brothers. And he refuses. He says, I don't want any flesh or wine, alcohol. Just give me vegetables and fruits and water. That's all I want. And the people who were leading the slaves, the eunuchs, they kind of freaked out because their life could be on the line from the king if somehow these slaves get sick or whatever. And they're probably like, bro, where are you going to get your protein? Same thing. They're probably freaking out like, what? And Daniel just says, hey, look, for just 10 days, test me and see how I fare. And we can go from there. So after 10 days, he and his brothers tested healthier, stronger, and wiser than everyone in the kingdom. Not only that, he was able to interpret dreams. And he interpreted the king's dream in such a way that it impressed King Nebuchadnezzar. And he got promoted to the right-hand man beside King Nebuchadnezzar of all of Babylon. And then eventually he gets persecuted from the king and he survives the lion's den and the fiery furnace, all these crazy stories. But bottom line, it's this powerful story about this prophet in Babylon. And the reason why I bring that up is one, to show how I got into this. I did that fast for 21 days and I was not excited about it when I first started, about the food part. Like I was a heavy meat eater. But once I got deep into it, I felt a shift internally. And that subtle shift led me to keep going. And by the time the 21 days were up, I was like, I don't think I'm going to stop. I think I'm just going to, why would I stop something? I felt so good, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all the ways. And that just started me on a journey to be like, well, wait, if Daniel's, why is Daniel doing this? Like, what is this tied to? And then it sent me back to Genesis in the creation narrative and how in Genesis chapter 1, just like Daniel chapter 1, it says that all of creation was created with this vegetarian, vegan kind of ideal, that no humans were eating animals, that the plants were given for food. And And then the deeper I went on that lifestyle, the more I watched my contemporaries and my peers in the church start to like raise an eyebrow and look at me as if I was doing something weird or wrong or antichrist or something. And being a bit of a rebel, I was like, okay, well, if they're tripping out, this makes me want to go farther into this and really understand what the truth is. And so that's kind of how my journey got started. But I say all that to say, you mentioned the euphemisms, you mentioned the cognitive dissonance, you mentioned um, the protein thing and all this. We talk about this in the film. It's kind of almost like a dad joke at this point, but I feel like I can say it because I'm a dad now. People talk about the matrix, but it's really the matrix. Like we literally live in the matrix. It's the flesh carnal system, is what it is. And so, in the same way that I'm sure you've heard the Rastafarians talk about Babylon, like that's their word for the matrix, Babylon, because it goes back to this time of Daniel when he's enslaved in the matrix of that time, which is Babylon. And what is Daniel's red pill in the matrix then? Abstaining from the corrupt foods, abstaining from the flesh. That is his way that he unplugs his head from the back of that system and says, I'm not going to do this. And he rises the ranks despite being a slave to the matrix. He breaks through the system. And so, though people may be listening to this and having all this resistance of like, wait, what's this vegan boy telling me about, blah, blah, blah. I was not a vegan boy at all, but I literally felt that plug unplug. And once you get out of it, it's so hard to see it when you're in it sometimes. So that's why you almost have to just say, if there's even a morsel of truth to this, just give it a shot. Go 10 days or something, or 21 days if you can. Just go one day, go one meal if you can. I don't know, but start small. But eventually you'll see that all this stuff will just start to make sense. And you see the euphemisms for what the word meat itself it doesn't even mean flesh. The original meaning of the word meat, even in the King James Bible, when the English language was really solidified, just meant food. In fact, in Genesis 1:29, when God outlines the human diet, he says, herbs bearing seed and fruit from the trees shall be yours for meat, for food. So we've twisted even the word to come up with meat, and like you said, like beef and pork and all this stuff to disconnect from the literal physical being that's there. And it's by design. It's by design because it's what holds the matrix system together. And it's still happening. You talked about the protein thing, and even in our spiritual communities and everyone that's in the same sphere that we are, there is such a heavy push right now to propagandize people to stick in this matrix system, because there was a spike in awareness of vegetarianism, veganism, off the back of maybe like an environmental crisis thing, which I think was a whole psyop too, like to connect veganism and vegetarianism to an environmental crisis is not what it's about.
Especially a fake one.
Right, especially a fake one. But now what you've got between the carnivore influence and everything, you see in the spiritual communities, it's like it used to be the New Agers and the spiritual people were the ones that were kind of the vegans. Like it was almost like they kind of went together. Now it's all the trad wives and this and that, chopping up a bunch of beef and eating bone broth and all this stuff. How did that happen? Well, I'm going to tell you, there are receipts. I've got friends who are actually following the trail of how there was legitimate board meeting email discussions about how to push that community back in the direction of consuming animals, but in a holistic, like our ancestors type of way. You know what I mean? So it's crazy.
I wanna see a documentary about that. That'd be really interesting. I've seen the movie Game Changers, which really touches on the athleticism and the marketing behind I've seen it several times actually, behind meat and how there's so much marketing, especially for men, like men need meat. It's like a masculine thing that you have to eat flesh and stuff. And,
Yeah.
nothing against men who make that choice. I mean, I like to give grace to everybody to make their own choices. I'm not trying to force anything, or I'm not a vegan. I've never been a vegan. I'm not militant about anything. And I don't think force is the way, but love is the way. And like expanded consciousness is the way. Like I just didn't know. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I'm really keen on on helping people learn in a way that allows them to make choices for themselves. And like you were saying, like just one meal or one day or one week and see how you feel. I know I certainly feel lighter. I feel like I am more awake to like when I just feel like it weighs me down more. Like I just feel like heavier when I eat meat. I feel heavier, like I can't um my emotional my ability to regulate my emotions, like maybe my patience is a little bit less. I feel less empathy for myself, like I'm just less nice to myself because I think there's some part of me subconsciously that's like you're not treating yourself well by eating this in a way. That's just kind of how I feel about it. But that movie, Game Changers, kind of opened my eyes to a lot of the marketing behind getting people to think that it's necessary, not realizing the disconnect between like these huge animals that they're slaughtering didn't eat themselves. Like they're just it's just, do we really need that? And there's something too to be said about, and I tried to explain this to my dad he was like a really heavy meat guy as well, and I think he kind of still is, but he was having some kidney and like kidney stone issues, and I'm like, he's very Christian, and I'm like, Dad, think about it. God put all of these living foods on the planet, fruits, vegetables, that are delicious and sweet. And I'm talking about fruit because fruit is loved by the liver, loved by the kidneys. I follow the medical medium. I don't know if you've heard of medical medium, but he's kind of turned me on to the idea that the fruit and things that are alive have frequency. And so if we're drinking all this bottled water, for example, without any minerals put in, I now put lime or lemon juice in my water all the time to give it life again. The more life you can eat, the better you're going to feel versus the more death that you eat, the worse you're going to feel. And to me, that's just like it's logical, but it's
It's
on
a
a
quote
spiritual
of Jesus.
level. And I like live for making the spiritual practical. That's what I really like.
You just quoted Jesus. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Right. So another uh obscurely glossed over quote is this fragment of a shred of a remnant of a whisper that we have from the mostly burnt record that was essentially talked about in a pejorative sense, highlighting this gospel of the Nazarenes, where he is quoted as saying, consumption of death leads to death, and consumption of life leads to life. So when you're saying when you're eating these living foods, you're actually eating life. I had to do a huge adjustment myself because for me, it was translating it into electricity and hearing people who, even though I have no clue how they do it, aren't breatharians and who have really transcended the idea that you can get energy through the electricity in the air. And I'm like, so how long did you go with just breath and oxygen? But to that point, water contains vital electric information that we call frequency because of the way that it's propagated is in a pattern that has a unique rhythm that we call a frequency, but it's electrical information that interacts with our electric body.
Yeah.
And when you heat something above a certain temperature, it simply loses that electric information. When you um, the electric information of whatever adrenaline or blood is in the animal, even if drained mostly, it's not drained entirely, and that information is now it, they're playing off the fact that your gut is your first brain. We now know that, science now can confirm that, but at the time in antiquity nobody knew that, or maybe they did, we don't know. But your gut is where you begin, your belly button, and kind of form outward in your mother's belly. And then if you like Cam and Caitlin were mentioning earlier, if you can get control over a population's initial decision making center, you have control over. So you have control over their decisions downwind. So what I believe that does is it creates a subculture where the subculture defines what goes on, not the logic, not even the holy text, the subculture, because Christians will eat pork all day, even though their holy text says not to, right? So it's not about what the text says at all, in my opinion. It's about what the subculture says. You go to America, the subculture says it's fine to treat a cow however you want to. Go to India, the subculture says it's not fine to treat a cow however you want to, although the leaders of that subculture are very much hypocritical. So my point being, everybody was conditioned, myself included. I grew up a couple hours away from where Cam grew up, and even though I didn't hunt, it was just chicken. Chicken was dinner. It's just what it was. It was chicken, occasionally steak or beef or something, but mostly chicken or fish or something like that. And it was not until I was an adult, and for my personal journey was a challenge that I did with my wife to just see if we could do the vegan thing. I wasn't in it for the faith, the energy, the animal, none of it. I was like, all right, I could do it. I could do it. It's a challenge. Challenge accepted. And then I did a whole year of it because I felt the same way Cam did. And then I was like, this is tough. We're traveling a lot. It's easy to be vegan in LA, but outside LA it's tough. So I'm just eat regular. So we ate regular for a whole year. And it wasn't until after Thanksgiving that year that I'm looking at my wife like, honey, I don't know. I think I felt better last year when I just wasn't eating all the stuff that I just ate just last week. So that was in 2018 for us. So it was a challenge that then got ended, that then I later realized I actually do feel different, and I should answer that. And so, however, anybody, whatever timing, whatever convictions, I don't hate on nobody. I am not an apologist, like you mentioned earlier. I don't even like titles. I don't even think Jesus would have considered himself a vegan or vegetarian. But like, what's it called when you don't eat horses? You see what I'm saying? It's like, what are you if you don't eat hippopotamus?
Yeah.
What's the term? It's just that they didn't have these animals on the menu as food. Even the ones we have on the menu as food, there's like 20 animals. 20. I mean, like I
Yeah.
tell people all the time, chicken, steak, pork, fish, okay, occasionally venison, occasionally bison, you know what I'm saying? Where the last time you ate some aardvark or
I
something?
know. And that to that point, that's one of the things where, a lot of times people want to push back on this with the appeal to nature of like, well, it's natural. We've been eating meat for whatever. Even if you grant that, it's like if you're eating chicken, there is nothing
Mm,
natural about it.
original
Chicken,
even.
yeah, or original. I mean, the birds themselves have been GMO'd and all the things to be these fat creatures that don't even resemble a chicken. They grow so fat. But the other thing is the amount of chickens we're growing. You know that the number one bird, chicken, the weight of chickens on planet Earth supersedes the weight of all other species of bird combined.
Whoa.
So we have genetically engineered a chicken planet.
A
Like
fake
we like
animal that
yeah,
we call
yeah,
the
like
food.
we that is if like a alien species came to Earth or if AI gets smart enough to analyze us, it's going to be it would be planet chicken is like literally what it would be. There, I mean, it is the pound for pound, and cattle and everything aren't far behind. It's crazy though how many chickens there are. Um, but I was gonna say too, to your point, Chris, about Jesus and the like they wouldn't be vegan. Yeah, because the word vegan is a 20th century invention, and I always say at the end of the day, this actually doesn't really have anything to even do with diet because the way that they saw it in their day, because they were trying to follow the original law of Moses, the original Torah, which actually for Moses seems to not just be the Mosaic Ten Commandments, but it goes back to the beginning, right? Because when Jesus is challenged in the Gospels and the Pharisees are like, well, what do you have to say about divorce? Like what's your take on that? Because he's always challenging the law, right? And he's like, well, it was not that way from the beginning, is what he says. But because your hearts are hardened, it is so now. So he's saying, like, yeah, like if you want a hard heart, then yeah, we have to engage in this. Or if your heart's in a hardened place with your lover or whatever, this is a result of the brokenness of where we are. But the ideal, what we're trying to get back to, is the way it was in the beginning. So in the same way, he and the Nazarenes are pointing to what is the actual, most people miss this. I miss this. What is the first commandment of the Bible? It's not actually love God with all your heart, soul, and mind understanding in the Ten Commandments. It's actually right there in Genesis 1 when everything's created. And then it's be fruitful and multiply and eat plants and fruits. That's literally, it's the dominion mandate, essentially. Dominion is, it has to do with multiplying yourself, also multiplying and stewarding the animals. And here's the diet. Here, again, I call it a diet, but it's really not. It's just in their mind, they didn't see animals as food. So it wasn't even a conversation around dying. It's like they just see animals as gods, other creatures that we actually have a relationship with. You know, Adam names the animals and all of this. So funny though, one little piece of information I'll drop here that's kind of an exclusive because it's like something I've been working on for a little while and I'm making a video on it. It's my newest thread of research that's just been absolutely melting my brain and like got me so stoked. And it's in relative to this idea of like Jesus wouldn't have called himself a vegan, right? Well, one word that's come up so much in my research around the Nazarene topic, the Nazareans. Chris knows, I mean, we're like, I'm obsessed with it. It's all I think about and talk about. And we have a whole group chat where we're all trying to figure out who were these people, you know? And we are always doing this research. And I came across so many times this idea of the kingdom of the Nabateans in Jordan, which is across the sea, the River Jordan and the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee on the other side, which is all where Jesus did his ministry, by the way. He was always across the Jordan over there doing all this stuff, you know, with the baptism, same thing with John the Baptist. And we see this idea that the Nazarene from Pliny's time and even Epiphanius's time, that they're all subsiding in this east of the Jordan area in the wilderness, right? Well, funny enough, I'm looking through all these maps all the time, and every time I come across, there's this Nabatean kingdom, which is literally from right around central to south Syria, down below, all the way below the Red Sea, down to like where it starts to connect to Egypt and everything. And there's this idea of the Nabatean kingdom that goes all the way back to like 4th, 5th century BC. Well, why is this important? Because I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, again, just thinking like childlike in a way, as silly as it sounds, I'm like, well, that's really similar to Nazarene. It's literally the same word, except for 2 letters. The B and the T traded out for the Z and the R, right? So I start doing this research, like, is there a linguistic shift that could have happened where maybe Nabatean actually was related to the word Nazarene, but there was a shift? Come to find out, Nabateans were Arabian, so they spoke Arabic, but they wrote Aramaic. Their script was Aramaic, the same script that Jesus spoke and maybe wrote in if he wrote. So there's that connection there. Not only that, they had this elaborate kingdom system. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever seen Petra, like the photos of Petra in Jordan. It's this crazy, huge doors, all the old world kind of heads that out there that put out content about Tartary and all this stuff always talk about Petra because it's just like crazy waterways and systems where they would have had these elaborate gardens in the desert that no one can explain how they thrived and figured out how to work with water like that, blah, blah. All this was happening at the time of Jesus. That kingdom was active with massive gardens bustling out of, which, by the way, Petra is in Wadi Musa, the valley of Moses. The reason why is because they believe that Moses, the story of Moses striking the rock and the water coming out, that's Petra. Petra means rock. It's the rock where the water comes out. Okay. Now check this. So there is evidence of a shift potentially from Aramaic tongue to Arabic tongue, which are very similar, that would explain a shift from Nazarene to Nabatean being the same word or a continuation. But where it really gets interesting is what the words actually mean. So the root of Nazarene, like I said before, it means the keepers, the preservers, right, of the Torah most likely. And the secondary meaning is the branch or the shoot, like I said, the botany term. And that actually comes from Isaiah 11, the great prophecy of the kingdom of heaven, where it says, from the stump of Jesse, a branch or a shoot, a netzer will come. That's the Messiah, Jesus, eventually. And in Isaiah, it says in that same chapter 11 that when that time comes, it's the kingdom of heaven now. The wolf will lay with the lamb. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The bear will graze. There will be no more slaughter on my holy mountain. So literally the kingdom of heaven is defined by no slaughter. Step 1, no slaughter. So Jesus is always quoting Isaiah and everything. So we know he had these same ideas. But here's the piece that's crazy. Nabati, the root of Nabatean, in Arabic means the keeper or the watcher, and the sprout or the shoot, same meaning, same meaning. And then here's where it gets really next level. I'm freaking out. I'm researching this like till 2 in the morning one night, and I come down to my wife. She's half asleep. I'm like, babe, you got to hear this because her name. My wife is from Egypt. She's Arabic herself, and her dad's name is Nabil, which is the same root as Nabati. And I'm like, you got to hear this. And then she goes, oh my gosh, you're missing the biggest piece. And I'm like, what? And she's like, don't you remember what I told you the word in Arabic for vegan is? And I'm like, no, I don't remember. She goes, Nabati.
Mm.
And I was like, boom. And then come to find out, this is like an old word. Like her mom knows the word Nabati and said that for centuries and centuries, anyone who decided to not eat flesh in Egypt, they would call them, oh, Nabati, you know? So my theory is this, that there was a whole thriving kingdom of Nabatis, which was the word for one who abstained. The Nabatean kingdom is famous for no blood ritual sacrifice. They offered frankincense and myrrh instead on their altars. Who does that sound like? Jesus, right, gets delivered the frankincense and myrrh from the Magi. Most scholars believe that those were Nabatean princes. So I think when Jesus is over in the Jordan area, he's interacting with this crazy old world system that's got all these elaborate, he's always talking about the living water springing forth and using all these agricultural parables. This is all Nabatean or, Nazarene uh, understandings. And to the last point, I think a lot of times we think about those times of the poor of Jerusalem and everything they're the hippies or whatever. And a lot of times this type of understanding of returning to this way of life sounds like hippie-ish and you're going to start wearing rope sandals and everything. I wear rope sandals, by the way, but you're going to just start. But I think they had a crazy kingdom. I think that when humanity unlocks this truth and really takes it on, we're going to tap into lost ways. I mean, this kingdom, no, they were unmatched. No one could defeat them. Like, go look at the Nabateans. It's crazy. The Greeks couldn't defeat them. Rome couldn't defeat them. They have these stories that are like 300 Sparta level where they're just laughing at these kingdoms that are trying to come take them over because they can't even survive in the desert. So they come there all parched and winded, and they're just kicking back, eating dates and pomegranates and waiting for them to come. And they have like resin they don't want to fight. They beg. Like you can read their letters to these kings and queens and stuff where they're like, hey, we really don't want to fight you because like you don't want this smoke. Like these were the craziest, most next level people at the time of Jesus. So anyways, all that to say, I think that there is this idea that when a Nazarene walked through the streets of Jerusalem, people knew, oh, that's one of those people that doesn't do the sacrifice. Like that's how they were defined. That was their separating point was, yeah, we don't participate in the whole blood thing, So
This is also the reason I think they redacted this man's life. See what I'm saying? It's like he was born and in like John baptized him. Wait, what? Was he across
Yeah.
the Jordan the whole time in the Nabatean kingdom?
and it's all over. Even John, that's what I'm saying. It's like the craziest thing. When you start to talk about this for anyone who knows their Bible, they're like, oh, well, John the Baptist, yeah, I guess, he didn't eat meat, but he ate bugs. He ate locusts and honey, right? Because that's what it says in the scripture. Another mistranslation, like blatant mistranslation. If he did eat bugs, that would still be, no flesh, and maybe, there's this kosher law. But the point is, locusts and honey is a mistranslation for the honey locust, which is the carob bean, which grows all over the area where John was baptizing. And still to this day, carob beans are called St. John's bread. Again, you can look it up because it's an ancient tradition that's been carried down that he was living off the fruits of this tree. It's where we get locust bean gum, like if you've seen it as an ingredient. Why? Because that's carob, but it's still called locust bean gum because it was the honey locust. That was the name. It looks like a locust, but it's sweet like honey. So all over the scripture we see, and that's Jesus's like mentor, right?
There's
So,
no man born among women whose shoes I'm worthy to fill. So this is
right.
the other big hurdle that Cam just teed up very eloquently, but maybe didn't verbosely say it. The Nazarene movement was already a thing Christians are taught to think that Jesus started a movement. That is the general takeaway.
Yeah,
We, amongst the people who have done the deep dive on Paul, know that most of the movement is more about the state and Paul doing, or Paul's words via the state. But the point is that Jesus wasn't trying to start a movement. And it took me like almost, most of the years of my life to learn, okay, got it. So this Nazarene is seen almost like Pythagorean kind of weird quasi thread that you can find connections through antiquity wasn't born in Jesus. The reason he mentioned that perhaps the Nabatean priests or at least princes that showed up with the frankincense and myrrh did that specifically was because of a pre-existing tradition that he was already a part of that they just have muted out of the record. It's literally nativity scene and then baptism scene. He was in the temple when he's 13. His parents didn't know, recognize him, and they was mad that he was like trying to learn from the priest instead of going home. And then
right.
he's baptized. So we got like a whole sentence of like half this dude, like 90% of his life, because then the rest of the whole book is about the last 3 years. And so I think what Cam is explaining is that what they've done is they've simply redacted the bigger corpus of what he represented. And then the state took it later and made it into something different. But the record is like I have like it helped me to really understand, okay, Jesus was the most prolific Nazarene, but he wasn't the first Nazarene. And he wasn't inventing anything. He was trying to rebuff and reestablish and restore something that preceded him. And he speaks that way, but we just, Christians at least are taught to kind of just equate it to him being God from the beginning and not really get into the details of what it is he's really trying to connect. And,
Well,
I,
Chris, to your, oh, sorry, I
go
was
ahead,
going
no,
to
go
say
ahead.
one thing to add on that. I agree. Like, so much has been redacted or mistranslated. Funny enough, if you use your Bible Hub app or Logos or whatever and get behind the English into the Greek and in the Hebrew, you'll see even from that jump, like, oh, it's the English that messed me up. Like, because when
Right.
I get to the Greek, there's more remnants of what was actually said. Like, for instance, in John 10:10, Jesus says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come to bring life and life abundantly. This is getting back to what you were saying, Chris, that was lost in a deeper, more literal sense that one way leads to death, one way leads to life. But in John, he says, the thief comes to steal, kill. But when you get behind that English word kill to the Greek word there that's translated as kill is thysea, which only ever means blood ritual animal slaughter. Like that is what that word means. So in our gospel, canonical gospel of John, we have from the mouth of Jesus him saying that Satan makes animal slaughter. That is a satanic thing. I bring life abundantly. And then he goes on to say, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, and I am that good shepherd. So he's actually, in that sense, again, restoring the beginning, because the idea of true dominion is service to others, service to other humans and also other
Yeah.
creatures and creatures, that we are here to make everyone thrive. That's the crown of creation of being a human and having the divine image of the creator God, is that we are creators and we create so that others can thrive, not to fill ourselves with luxury and all of this stuff. So he's always flipping the script in that way. But we have, even in our own text, even though so much has been redacted, you can find these hints where it's like the Magi are delivering the frankincense and myrrh. Who are those Magi? Oh, wait a minute. Why is he in a manger surrounded by farm animals that are sacrificed? And they're all looking at him in anticipation, like, oh,
The
is this the
one.
Nazarene king that's going to come free us from the temple? Like we see the hints of the true story in our text still. Even the blood ritual thing, whether it's God preserving the truth or some kind of cryptic revelation of the method where the deceivers have to leave a little morsel of the truth in there still, I don't know, it's one or the other. But even in Leviticus, the most crazy, bonkers Levitical priestly nutty code that's in our Bible that was definitely added later, even in that text in Leviticus 5:11, there is a clause for sin offering that if you're poor, you can just offer grain. You can just offer some flour. It says. Everybody look it up in your Bible. It blew my mind when I saw this. I was like, no, there's no way. Someone shared me. Had like, have you looked at Leviticus 5:11? And I flipped to it. There it is in black and white, Leviticus 5:11. Oh, offer your lamb, and then if you can't offer that, then offer your doves. And if you're really poor, then well, you can just offer some grain and your sins will be forgiven. So now what's interesting is this unlocks a whole other side of the equation from the Nazarene misnomer, which is that also another name for that early movement of Jesus were the Ebionites or the Ebionim, which is the Hebrew word for the poor. So, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, Blessed are the poor. Uh, Paul, when he's running around preaching all this crazy stuff, they're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, whatever you're doing out there, just make sure you send alms back for the poor. That's the name of the community that is first following Jesus. And it ends up being kind of like a derogatory term that they take on later because people make fun of them. And it's like, oh, they're just those poor people. But again, kind of like the Nabatean kingdom thing I was painting, they weren't poor as in they were like hobos. No, they were poor as in they didn't participate in the empirical system. So when we hear these things like the Nazarenes held everything in common, we see that all over the book of Acts. Jesus himself even says, when he's asked, how do we get salvation? He doesn't say, confess my name as Lord and believe in this and that and the other. He says, follow my commandments, which are the 10 commandments, essentially, including thou shalt not kill, which includes all living creatures. But then the rich young ruler says, well, I have done that. I'm actually following those commandments. And he's like, okay, well, if you really want to be great, then sell everything you own and give it to the poor. Well, we think of that as, again, like this complete renunciation of voluntary poverty where you just become this hobo walking around and preaching that Jesus is going to save you. But what it seems to really be is it seems to be that they had a non-profit style outside of the imperial system where we all as a community own everything together so that Rome cannot tax it nor take it away from us because they actually knew their law code of the time. And so I say all that to say that clause in Leviticus 5:11, I truly believe that they knew that too. And they were like, hey, look, we don't need, like, we're the poor people. Like, we'll give you some, we'll do some frankincense and myrrh and some grain offerings and all that. But like you said in your own book, look at your book. Like, we don't have to offer an animal. You know what I mean? Like, I believe these people were really that smart and they were seeing all this tomfoolery back then. And that's why Jesus is saying, you've heard eye for an eye, but I say, he's always challenging them and flipping the script on what they thought was the law of God, right? So
the only other thing, because I don't want to just hog the convo, but I want to tee up something that Cam just said about just this idea. Okay, so has everybody here seen the movie Idiocracy? Okay, you remember the concept of like humans like not knowing how to grow plants. So Luke Wilson coming in and just putting water instead of Gatorade on the plants. It's like, he's a genius. Like, I don't mean to make Jesus's miracles equivalent to Luke Wilson's miracle, but I think there was an aspect of that going on in a first century, heavily oppressed, heavily demonized, subjugated Judea, where you had this, we'll call it vegetarian, kind of holistic, daily bathing, spiritually pure group in the kind of, the hillbilly conspiracy theorists out in Ohio, essentially, in West Virginia, in the equivalent metaphor. And I do believe that their psychic abilities, their electric abilities, their telekinetic abilities for things like war, their acuity, visual acuity, all these things were just so much higher than the idiocracy level temple nobodies of the city that this Nabatean conversation carries spiritual and a little bit of like super physical like it's like they're Olympians compared to middle schoolers in the physiological sense.
yeah.
And then if you're talking about like healing touch or whatever qigong and some of the stuff that these people do, not being related to Vedic tradition or Eastern tradition, but just common understanding of what humans are capable of. Now some of the miracles don't seem as like outrageous necessarily in the backdrop of this whole like, okay, so if we're literally looking at a bunch of people from Idiocracy and you have a handful of astute homesteaders who might happen to actually have some extra paranormal ability because of their parents raising them pure for so many generations. Maybe that's a little bit more of what antiquity took to then crank the narrative on and make he like heal this man's leg. It's like I'm pretty sure he put some hydrogen peroxide on that little bacteria there and miracle. Again, I'm not trying to make Jesus not an important individual in the wider conversation. I'm just saying that I think we're looking at an embellishment of a purposeful retelling of the narrative because of how powerful that makes the proletariat in the eyes of the state, should they ever
Yeah.
learn this.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in and say that I think that analogy is really good because it's like a consciousness thing. And so we see that even now translated in that people aren't able to understand what the way actually is. Like it's a higher consciousness, it's a frequency, it's like something you can tune into, and they're not understanding how their frequency is being impacted by what they're choosing to eat, what they're choosing to watch. The churches that they're going to telling them they have to be covered in blood in order to be saved. So they've chosen to worship it instead of follow it. And it's a consciousness thing. So it's like, as people are starting to wake up and realize that, oh, this isn't love. This is like an abusive relationship of like, if you don't believe in me, you're gonna burn. Like, I love you so much that I sent my own son to die for you, and he had to die. Like, it's like you're gonna burn if you don't believe this. Like, when more and more people are starting to realize that that's not the real God, which is the whole thing that Jesus was trying to teach us was like, this is not the way. This is not, the religious people have it wrong and they're using it to manipulate you. It is still happening. History is repeating itself. And I think the idiocracy metaphor is pretty spot on. It's like an exaggerated, almost like Black Mirror episode where Black Mirror does a really good job of exaggerating what's actually already happening. Like people are like the episode where people are riding bikes and watching ads the whole time. It's like you're just on a hamster wheel. It's like this exaggerated metaphor of what's actually happening. And I just see that happening now. Well, it's 1:38 Eastern, and I want to make sure we have some time for the audience to ask some questions because I told them it would only be 2 hours. And of course, we can go a little over if we all have time and want to stick around. I'm really enjoying this, and I want to thank you both for being here. It's been a tremendous chat, and I've seen some stuff showing up in the comments too. I'll try to read through them, but if anybody has a question or you've asked a question in the comments that you want answered, just use the hand raising and we'll just take them in the order that they're received. And you guys can ask Chris and Cam questions. And if you guys are listening to the podcast and you're not a member of the Conscious Rebels Network, which maybe we should rename it to the Conscious Nazarene Network, because I mean the same thing. Um, we really invite you to do so you can get access to the discussion that's going to about to happen with the group, more candid discussion with the co-creator of Christspiracy documentary, Kameron Waters, and the host of the 6-7 podcast, Chris Crutchfield, which I realized I didn't introduce either of you guys, but yeah, so thank you guys so much for being here, and we'll hand it over to the members to ask their questions.